The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Well, it must be an awfully weird time of year if the first player we're going to talk about on a podcast is Rodney Hood. Well, we're not actually going to talk about Rodney Hood, but he did have a big ball game. So I suppose it's only fair that he gets his name mentioned at the outset. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today, everyone. I am Dan Besbris, fighting yet another head cold because, that's life right now. So, I don't know. I might sound totally normal to you guys, but inside my own head, it feels like a weird echo bin. Things are just banging around in there, and I can't tell what I actually sound like. We're going to do the show as if everything is normal, and you guys can let me know on Twitter if something sounds completely off, besides just my state of being. I am Dan Besbris, at Dan Besbris on Twitter. This is, of course, a Hoop Ball presentation, and all podcasts at the Mighty Hoop Ball are brought to you by our good friends at Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company. HawaiianIsles.com is the website, at HI Kona Coffee on Twitter, or you can just go to Amazon.com and search for Hawaiian Isles. And I know that some of you have been stumbling over the name a little bit, and I don't 100% know why, but it's Hawaiian Isles. It's not islands. It's not like a grocery store aisle. It's ISLES. So if you want to find them, HawaiianIsles.com, Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company. You got to check it out. I think everybody at Hoop Ball is addicted. You guys could be as well. I know many of you are so the long-term listeners of this podcast and all of our stuff at Hoop Ball. Many of you have become addicted on top of the Hoop Ball staff, and you've let us know in the chat rooms, and that's also very cool. And if you have any questions about their products, you can ask them on Twitter, as I just mentioned, at HI Kona Coffee. It's Monday, which means it's reverse chronological lightning round. This is pretty standard operation at this point. I'm looking at the levels here on today's podcast, and they all seem a little bit high. So hopefully that doesn't mess with anything. It's the end of a wild weekend. It's the end of my rope. We'll get there. Everything is A-okay. Fear not, everyone. We'll just, it's a process. Which means we go through the What's Reverse Chronological Lightning Round. If you're asking at this point, I hope that you're a new listener to the podcast. That would actually be music to my ears. We go backwards through the weekend, Sunday, then Saturday, and if we need any other teams on Friday, and we profile each team's most recent basketball game, just to give you kind of a weekend reset and gather ourselves heading into the week ahead. And I got to tell you, I'm right there with you on this one. I need this weekend reset. I was very busy this weekend. I did not have a chance to watch every single game the way I normally like to, and so this is actually kind of a nice exercise for me and a recommendation for all of you who are sort of building your own NBA fantasy handicapping portfolio. This is a way that you can really, I think, become a bit more self-sufficient, if indeed that's something that you're working towards. That is to say, going through all 30 teams to start the week is a really big deal. You look at schedules, you look at how the players have been doing, you look at guys that are pointed up, you look at any trends that may be happening, you look at any weird storylines that could actually begin to take shape this week, and you feel pretty good about where you stand going into the week ahead, just like a nice firm foundation. So let's just launch right into that stuff. And we're at a point in the year now where there really isn't much left to promo on the podcast, so we can just dive right into the goodies. The shows, as a result, if you guys have noticed over the last couple of weeks, are going to be shorter in general. Monday, Wednesday, Friday are probably going to be about standard length. Tuesdays and Thursdays, as I talked about last week, are going to be closer to a half an hour instead of an hour. It's just little things where, at this point in the season, as opposed to getting sidetracked, long tangential thought processes, we're just going to really hone in, laser focused on getting to the finish line, winning some money, and then we can talk about all that strategic stuff once the season ends, all the overarching things. Right now, it's about what are we doing every day, day-to-day process. Sunday, Portland at Charlotte. Happy Rodney Hood Day, everyone. 27 points for Rodney on 14 shots. 3 3-pointers, couple of steals, made all 6 of his free throws, and this is probably, much like the Jack Nicholson film, as good as it gets for Hood. No, you're not picking him up. Enes Kanter, I'd say, he struggled in this game. He went 2 for 8 from the field, which is unusual for him after the visa situation that kept him from traveling to Toronto. He didn't want to get picked up by Interpol. If he makes his normal 4 to 5 out of his 8 shots in this ball game, then you're talking about a 10 to 12 point performance. 12 and 8 with a steal on good percentages is what you want. He just didn't make his shots. And that's his value to your team moving forward. He's not going to do much on the defensive end. He never does. The hope with Enes is about 8 rebounds, about 11 points, and doing it on 55% shooting and 80 plus at the free throw line. So this really isn't that far off. If that's not that helpful for your fantasy team, go somewhere else. That's okay. I'm not being spiteful here. I'm saying this from the deepest part of my heart. This is a category hunting part of the year. I have a team where a guy like Enes Kanter could be very useful because I am battling in both of the percentages in a couple of different roto leagues. So a couple extra made buckets, a couple extra made free throws, as opposed to maybe a center that'll block a few extra shots but miss some free throws, is actually valuable to me. It might not be to you. If there's nobody near you in field goal percent or free throw percent on either side in your roto league, he's useless to your team. Jeremy Lamb continues to excel off the bench for the Charlotte Hornets. A rare slow game for Cody Zeller. He just got eaten alive by Yusuf Nurkic, but everybody did. So Frank Kaminsky saw 27 minutes. I don't foresee this being a trend moving forward. It is nice to see Jeremy Lamb playing so well in his new role. He's able to get easier looks against second units. He's not competing with other guys for touches as often. Marvin Williams didn't take many shots, low usage game. I mean, he still got his 3, his 2 steals, his 3 blocks. Again, we're talking about what guys bring to the table at this point in the year. Houston beat Boston on the road pretty handily. James Harden was excellent in this one. He took 31 shots, but I mean, who cares? He got 42 points on him. Eric Gordon finally got hot for a game. Chris Paul's been playing better of late. PJ Tucker looked good. Still interested to find out what Kenneth Faried's role is actually going to look like once he's back and Capella's fully up to speed. I'm not super excited about Kenneth, but 25 minutes is probably enough for him to help you in field goal percentage, rebounding, not free throw percentage, right? That's where Enes Kanter has the edge. Faried has the edge in steals and blocks by a little bit. Kenneth is more like a 0.7 and 0.8 kind of guy in 25 minutes, where Kanter's more like a 0.4 and 0.5 guy in his 19 or 20. So Kenneth has the edge in defensive stats, and this is where you start to, put your third centers or second centers head-to-head and figure out what's going to help your team the most. I still don't know what he's going to get 25 minutes. He may not. They usually like to run a pretty tight rotation, and as Capella gets fully healthy, I've got to think that pushes Faried's minutes down, but maybe. That's where we sit on that one. Maybe. Boston, not particularly interested in what they've got going on there. The same old story most nights. It's just too many mouths to feed. Atlanta at Chicago, a rematch of a 4 overtime game, if I'm not mistaken. Trae Young got ejected for a stare down in this one, which was pretty stupid. Alex Len filling in for 3 injured players all at once. Omari Spellman's out for multiple weeks. Taurean Prince still dealing with a personal situation, and John Collins was out with illness, so they just had no front court, and that allowed Alex Len to get loose. We all know what Alex Len is, and unless the runway is completely barren, then he's not going to be able to do much. We still don't really know what Kent Bazemore is going to be when this team on the wings is fully healthy. He got 28 minutes in this one with Taurean Prince out and didn't play particularly well. So he's a guy that I'm still not really picking up. I know I mentioned it's been a back and forth couple of weeks for Bazemore, where when he was getting a bunch of minutes with the team not healthy, it was Herter first and then it was Prince. And I thought, listen, if he actually sticks, this is something you're not going to want to miss. The game where everybody was healthy, his minutes trended way back down into the teens, and I thought, all right, I think we can move along from this dude. But then Prince is out again, personal stuff. That means Bazemore gets more minutes. I think that I'm probably just out on this because I don't want to deal with the day-to-day. Heaven forbid I miss news that the team is fully healthy, and I don't remember to get Bazemore out of my lineup. I don't want to deal with it. Both teams, it looked like, were trying to keep the minutes down for the starters, obviously coming off of that crazy ball game the previous time out. Robin Lopez looked really good again. He's a must-start guy. Zach LaVine looked exhausted. Chris Dunn actually played a little bit better because Zach LaVine was exhausted. And that's all she wrote. Even Cristiano Felicio had an okay game because everybody was so pooped. The Knicks and the Clippers, an ugly ball game that featured a marvelous night again from Mitchell Robinson, 16 and 13 with 4 blocks on 7 out of 8 shooting. He's going to win you leagues. Emmanuel Mudiay is playing more point guard than Dennis Smith Jr. a lot of the time these days. He's still more of a points league kind of guy, but I think a guy that you probably could trust in your points league. It seems like he's been pretty consistent of late. Luke Cornett managed to show back up into the rotation in this one. I don't know why Noah Vonleh's still getting 27 minutes. The Knicks are weird. In any event, I think Mitchell Robinson is the only 9-category guy worth playing right now, unless DeAndre Jordan comes back. Landry Shamet had a big ball game. He was due for one after a number of clunkers, 7 3-pointers, but almost nothing else at all. He's still not a guy that I'm on. Gilgeous-Alexander played better in this one. JaMychal Green, this was a blowout, so the bench guys saw a few extra minutes. In general, with the Clippers, I've put my foot down on a particular set of guys, and I'm going to stick with it. And that is Gallo, Lou Williams, Beverly, and Montrez, and everybody else is on the outside looking in. Cleveland, a blowout win over the Orlando Magic. It is truly remarkable what Kevin Love being back, even not on a good game for him, just being alive does for this Cavaliers team. Love had 16 and 14 on 3 out of 11 shooting in this ballgame. I mean, it was terrible. And they were just leagues better than him not being on the court. It's crazy. They didn't shoot the ball well. They didn't play particularly well, but they turned the ball over less. It's just everything changes for them with him out there. And they're screwing up the tank, which makes me actually a little bit nervous that they're going to force Kevin Love to sit because, darn it, they're winning too many games here down the stretch. Chetty Osman's been playing better, much better with Kevin Love around. I don't think that's a coincidence. Jordan Clarkson did better in this ball game. No Ante Zizic with a concussion, so that means Larry Nance gets a big bump. And I still basically only trust Larry Nance Jr. and Kevin Love on this team in 9-category formats. Although I will say Chetty Osman is getting closer. He's had a couple of good weeks in a row. His season mark is still top 180, but he's been pretty good since the All-Star break. Is there a massive regression coming? Possibly. I'm pretty worried about that. But he's posting decent numbers of late. He's scoring the ball well. He's hitting 3-pointers. There's actually been a couple of steals blended in, handful of rebounds, couple of assists, making his free throws. It hasn't been that way all season long. Over the last month, he's a top 40 guy because of this particular stretch. So, yeah, he should be used right now, but there could be a massive cool down coming, and I'd just be aware. Minnesota looks terrible these days. They desperately need Robert Covington back, and we might very well see him in their next ball game. He's been recalled from the G League. This is the end of Minnesota's road trip, so they're coming back home. My assumption would be that he doesn't play a particularly large number of minutes in his first game back, but give it a week, he's probably up into the 20s, at which point he should be activated. Meanwhile, it's mostly just Karl Anthony Towns and a bunch of guys going through the motions on this team. They got whipped by a Wizards team that's just frankly not very good, and the only guy on the Wolves that sort of cut the mustard was Towns. Šarić was actually putting together a decent ball game, then he missed a bunch of free throws, and Taj Gibson ended up playing more minutes down the stretch, and that's looking like another messy timeshare after it seemed like Dario was starting to take over. And on the Wizards side, we finally got that decent game from Jabari Parker, which hadn't been coming around in a while. Bobby Portis got hot, so that meant Thomas Bryant's minutes were stuck in the 19 range. That's unfortunate. Couple more minutes, and he's really a key piece. I'm sticking with Bryant, by the way. I don't think that Portis is going to play this well every night. There are going to be a lot of evenings where Bryant is able to do more with his hustle stats, and he does a nice job of sort of floating his lines even when they're not very good. He made both of his free throws. He had a block and a 3-pointer mixed in. Yes, obviously we wanted more, but I'm not punting on Thomas Bryant. I like his outlook the rest of the year. Maybe even more than Bobby Portis just because of the build on their stat sets. Portis' points and rebounds, and that's about it. Toronto loses in Detroit. The Pistons have been playing quite well of late. I don't think we can put it all on Wayne Ellington, but he's helped. He played 35 minutes in this ballgame, 2 threes and 3 steals. Steals are starting to come around for him a little bit. He's settling in with his team. And as I thought, when we started to talk about which three-point specialist was going to be the one that you could probably trust, it's looking more and more like it might be Ellington. It was a rocky first week and a half in Detroit. Make no mistake. He had that 37-minute game where things looked like they were trending in the right direction. Then he played 4 games in a row of minutes in the 20s. But in those games, he started to find the range. He started to find his role. He had 2 3-pointers in this one. He had 5 in their game the night before in Cleveland. He has 5 steals over those 2 games and 7 threes. So there is some outlook here. Although, again, it's very specialist-y this time of year. Luke Kennard shot the ball well again. He's been doing that a bunch lately, although the rest of his fantasy lines have been severely lacking. Where, with Ellington, you get the threes and the steals. With Kennard, you get the threes and I don't know of anything else. It's basically just 3-pointers. And then if he's on the floor long enough, a couple of rebounds and a couple of assists. I'd rather have Wayne Ellington because at least you have the steals look. Threes and steals, it's 2. Kennard is really mostly one thing, and if his shot's not dropping, then it's very little. Marcus Sol slotting into the starting lineup now. His minutes have trended up hard. Serge Ibaka's have gone down equally hard. And so Gasol has become hopefully a guy that folks bought low on. He shot just 2 for 10 in this ballgame, but he made all 8 of his free throws. It's a couple in a row where he's logged the lion's share of the center minutes, so Toronto's moving his direction as we figured they would, and he should be set for a nice finish to the season. What do you do if you have Serge Ibaka, is a question I've seen a little bit since this all happened. Well, you're probably stuck. I don't know that he's going to be seeing sub-20 minutes every night, but the last 3 have been certainly a downward-pointed arrow. 20 minutes, 16 minutes, and then 20 minutes again. He's now the backup center. It was nice that he had 11 rebounds in this game, but he's just not on the floor enough to be the kind of impact guy on offense that we needed earlier in the year, and he doesn't block shots the way he used to early in his career. So it's not like he can just rev it up for 19 minutes and go block 3 shots. So you might be screwed. Honestly, I mean, maybe you could try to sell at this point, but I doubt you're going to get enough back where it's even worth it. Right? If you sell Ibaka now, he's number 64 on the season after this recent rough week, which hasn't changed things all that much. I think he was like around 60, so he's dropped a couple of slots. You're not going to be able to get a top 65 guy back, not with the way he's been playing the last week and the fact that his arrow's pointed straight down. So do you really want to trade him for like a top 120 guy? I doubt it. I'd rather just bench him, hope this thing gets better, and or if it doesn't, just pick someone up. Plus, most of us, I think, are past our trade deadlines in leagues. There's probably a handful of you that still have the possibility of trading. Would I drop Ibaka if somebody came along that had tremendous upside? I think the answer is yeah. I know that seems crazy, but the opportunity is evaporating for him. Pascal Siakam is dominating at the 4, and Marc Gasol now is starting to take over at the 5. So you might be screwed. I don't know that I'd say just go dump him for anybody, but and nobody really, in my estimation, surfaced over the weekend that had the kind of wild upside that I would drop Serge Ibaka for. But if somebody does, I think he's now a drop candidate. Zaza Pachulia, by the way, was ejected in this ballgame, if anybody cares. Memphis at Oklahoma City. The Thunder were able to, sneak by. Best way I can describe it. Avery Bradley had 27, 5, and 7 in this ballgame with no Mike Conley. And I'm wondering how many more times we see that down the stretch. Of course, Delon Wright gets a bump into the starting lineup and a huge minutes boost when Conley is out. And those two guys become extremely interesting when there's no Mike Conley. I know Avery Bradley had the bigger game between the two of those dudes today with 27, 5, and 7, and he did it on great percentages. But if someone was like, hey, Dan, which of these two guys would you want if I told you Mike Conley was sitting the rest of the way? It would be Delon Wright, easily, because of the upside in steals, blocks, and percentages. Because Avery Bradley, this percentage for him was farther off his career norm. He's a career 43.5% shooter, and he made 11 out of 19 shots in this ballgame. Delon Wright, in admittedly a slightly more limited sample size because mostly taking easier looks off the bench with Toronto, is closer to 45% shooter. And so for him to shoot 43%, he's actually slightly sub-career mark in this game. But you can see it. 2 steals, a block, a three-pointer, 8 rebounds, 6 assists for Wright. The sky's the limit for this kid if Mike Conley is ever shut down. And Delon Wright is probably fairly available in your fantasy leagues. I'm not saying necessarily he is. He's 8% owned in Yahoo leagues, which of course means in mine he's like half owned. Once they hit 16%, they're basically all owned in my leagues. That's the way I operate with those percentages given on Yahoo. That's how competitive my 12-team leagues are. Avery Bradley, I believe right now, is much more heavily owned thanks to the fact that he's been scoring more of late. Yeah, he's up at 28% owned. And it's crazy, but he's actually been pretty decent even when Conley was in there. If you look at the games since the All-Star break, or effectively since the trade, you can throw out the first one where he didn't see as many minutes. 38, 29, 33, 19. That was the aberration in a loss in Cleveland. 34, 38, 32, and 35. His minutes really haven't fluctuated almost at all, regardless of Conley's status, and I don't know that we ever see slow-mo again this year. So Bradley's minutes are safe. What a crazy universe we live in right now. Avery Bradley, the problem here, as we dig a little bit deeper, is that even with his nice recent run, he's sitting outside the top 100 because his shooting percentage has been pretty awful outside of this ballgame. 11 out of 19 is very good. Most of his games in Memphis, he's been shooting closer to 40%. So it's a weird bag right now for Avery Bradley. It's tough to know which one you're going to get on a night-to-night basis. He's also been shooting free throws way above his career mark, and that one would think is due for some kind of negative regression, but it might not happen this year. It's such a short ramp here between this and the end of the season, shade over a month at this point, where he really could just keep up 90% shooting for a month at the free throw line, and maybe next year it all falls apart. I don't know. But if you're looking for someone who's scoring right now, he's averaging 15-ish points with Memphis, 16 points with Memphis, 4 boards, 4 assists, a steal, and 2 3-pointers. Avery Bradley is your very safe, high floor, low ceiling guy. Delon Wright is the lower floor, higher ceiling guy because we've seen it. The games when Mike Conley sits, he pops off. He's a good foul shooter. He can roll up defensive stats, both steals and blocks, when given the appropriate number of minutes. Toronto, last year in particular, when he was averaging about 21 minutes a game, he averaged 1 steal and half a block. You ramp that up closer to 30, you might be talking about a guy at 1.5 steals and 0.8 blocks a game. I don't know if it necessarily translates on a linear curve that way, but he has outstanding upside. Not as many three-pointers as Avery Bradley, but really, come on, do we really need three-pointers at this point? Everybody on your team shoots the three. I'd rather have a guy in someone like Wright who's maybe making 1 a game in Memphis, or less even, but is getting you stuff in better percentages, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks. He excites me as someone that could be interesting in, 2 weeks from now. And Avery Bradley is more the guy that's okay now and probably will just be okay moving forward. And for Delon Wright, frankly, if you're punting points, he's actually been pretty good in Memphis anyway. Not scoring very much, but percentages have been okay. outside of his first few games, I suppose. Wiped those out. They've been a bit better. He's been making all of his free throws. Averaging about 5 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, and half a block. I just wish they'd shut Conley down. That would change everything. Joakim Noah, who I finally said, yeah, I guess you can give him a look, was terrible in this ballgame. He had a good previous one, but it's why it's frightening with a guy like him. Because for anybody that doesn't have a rich history of performing in 20 minutes a game, then to do it for 2 weeks, you just knew that there was a clunker coming. I'm probably sitting on him a little bit longer. Ivan Rabb didn't even get into this ballgame, and Valanciunas logged 32 minutes, which is certainly on the high side, and I would venture to guess that Steven Adams had something to do with that. I think Noah probably gets back up near 20, 21 minutes in the next ballgame. He's probably better in that one. But if he starts to stink on a multiple game basis, get out as quickly as you got in. And Bruno Caboclo is interesting. I would love to see more blocked shots. He's just trying to figure out how to stay on the floor without fouling. But certainly Bradley and Wright are the two that you're really keeping an eye on, because that Conley situation is tenuous at best. I'm watching those guys. Thunder are not particularly interesting with no Paul George. It was interesting to see Nerlens Noel not play in the second half of this game. They went smaller. A heavy dose of Steven Adams, obviously, but still only 32 minutes for him. Dennis Schroeder played a team-high 40 minutes in this ball game. And, brutal percentages aside, he's relatively useful. Certainly in points leagues, he's outstanding when Paul George is out. He's the guy that gets the minutes bump when there are extra minutes available. But he's also shooting some ungodly low number on the year, 41.5%, I think. Almost an unusable number in 9-cat. Almost unusable. He was way too heavily owned and remains way too heavily owned. He's owned in 66% of Yahoo leagues, and he's ranked number 187 in 9-cat. Horrific. Ah, well. Hopefully Paul George is back soon. I have him in multiple places. You guys know that. I had so many drafts where I was picking on the turn. I ended up with Dame and Paul in a couple of different spots. And so the fact that they've both been healthy has really floated my teams when some of my other picks didn't pan out as well. And Paul George being out at this critical juncture, not my favorite. Back to Saturday, Detroit and Cleveland. We actually already talked about these two teams, so no need to cover them again. Orlando is not a particularly interesting fantasy team right now. It's just, whether or not they let Jonathan Isaac do stuff versus when they don't. That's basically how their games go. Indiana, dealing with the injury to Domantas Sabonis. Miles Turner now has worked himself back into shape. Thad Young, Darren Collison, Bojan Bogdanovic. Wesley Matthews has actually been okay for this team, maybe even a bit better than I expected, although really pretty close to what I think we all figured he would be, which is, top 125-ish, terrible field goal percent, some threes, couple of rebounds, couple of assists, not much in the defensive department, couple of steals here and there. If you're going to compare Matthews against Wayne Ellington, I might lean Ellington just for the fact that he's not going to take quite the same volume of non-three-pointers, so the drag is less hard, but they're actually both pretty close. They're probably both in that top 125 territory. Wesley Matthews, I think, he had one big game blended in there. There was a 20-point game. There was a 24-point game where he hit 6 3-pointers, so he's just inside the top 100 over the last 2 weeks, and his field goal percent is above the career mark, but he's now sort of regressed downward over his last couple of games. Anyway, you know what you're getting. That's what I'm getting at here. It's threes, mostly. Brooklyn's looked terrible lately. Miami's been an interesting team of late. This is the addition by subtraction of the Miami Heat. And I know everybody's going to immediately say it's the lack of Hassan Whiteside that's changed everything for this team. But I would almost add the lack of James Johnson has really freed up Kelly Olynyk. And it's not as though Miami's going out and beating everybody right now. It's just that fantasy numbers have gotten better. Miami's only 2-4 in their last 6 ball games. So they haven't exactly turned the corner on the year. I think they're 2-2 since Whiteside went down, if I'm not mistaken. Adebayo is obviously a guy you're streaming as long as Whiteside is out. Olynyk is a dude you're streaming as long as James Johnson is out. And it might end up being more than a stream just based on the simple fact that maybe James Johnson doesn't play again this year. In the backcourt, we got more from Rodney Magruder and Derek Jones Jr. This is a blowout, though, so it's tough to know exactly how many of those minutes would have stuck on a normal night. I hate the fact that Dion Waiters is still playing as much as he is. Justice Winslow is obviously going to see minutes when Goran Dragic is out, and he missed this one with a calf strain. This was not a rest game related to his knee stuff. This was a new injury, which is a huge downer because he was ramping up hard, and I was starting to think, I wonder if we've got an iteration of Goran Dragic that we haven't seen in 2 to 3 years, and then he hurt himself. We shall see. He's questionable for their game against the Hawks tonight. The fact that he seems to be not that far away is a positive sign, but I might consider keeping him on my bench just to see what the minutes look like as they continue to work him back into the mix. If not for the calf strain, I think I would have said throw him in this game. It seemed like the minutes were trending up. His numbers were looking good, but now I've got to think they're going to dial him back down a little to try to prevent a secondary injury. I still am a bit higher on him than I was before he came back from injury. I think, and it's not necessarily recency bias, because it had been about a year and a half where Dragic had appeared to be trending down pretty hard, but maybe this helped fix a lot of that. We shall see, but I wouldn't race into it, is what I'm saying. Memphis, we already talked about. This was the game where Joakim Noah did play better, but he only saw 17 minutes in that one also, which is frightening. And then for Dallas, they just got smoked, but Dwight Powell was actually still good. He was sort of the one Maverick that didn't stink in this ball game, and he's playing 30-plus minutes a night. He, to me, is a must-own, must-start guy, especially while he's with the starting lineup, but certainly in almost any scenario, it seems like they're feeding him a lot of minutes. We already talked about Oklahoma City, San Antonio. Normally a pretty predictable fantasy team, but a little bit of a new look the last couple of ball games. I'm interested to see if it sticks, and that is Jakob Poeltl. He got the start against Andre Drummond, and I figured, all right, well, this is a short-lived situation. They wanted to throw him in there so that LaMarcus Aldridge didn't have to deal with Drummond. Is it the same thing with Steven Adams? Maybe. That could certainly be the case. Poeltl getting back-to-back starts. He played 60 minutes in these two games combined and had 6 blocks, 2 steals, and 21 rebounds. Not a good free throw shooter, which is obviously going to sting if he's out there for long stretches. The question becomes for me how he does when they face Atlanta later this week. That's on Wednesday. He might very well start again tonight as they take on the Denver Nuggets. That's another big traditional center, but not every team has that guy. Atlanta with Dwayne Dedmon, who tends to roam the perimeter a little bit on offense. Milwaukee, Brook Lopez doesn't get anywhere near the bucket. Dallas, Dwight Powell, he's more of a leaper. The Knicks, if there's no DeAndre Jordan, who the hell knows is even going to start at center on that team. So after this game with Denver, Poeltl could very well disappear. But maybe they liked what he's done. He started both of their home games, and they've played well. Spurs have won both of them. Detroit and Oklahoma City, a couple of decent wins for San Antonio. So maybe he bought himself more time in the starting lineup. There's certainly upside here with Poeltl. Somewhat limited, of course, based on his free throw shooting. But as you look towards basically just the last couple of games that he's started, so you take the last week, he's sitting right around the top 100. He had an 11-minute goose egg mixed in there as well, which I think might still be factoring into that. Not positive. This is my fault for not looking exactly how far back the the weeks are running. But if he's averaging a steal and 2 blocks, which he basically is over the last 3 or 4 games, then he's a guy that should probably end up being rostered. How do you deal with this? Well, for me, he's a guy that I pick up if I have somebody that I'm perfectly willing to dump. And on one of my teams, that was Tyler Johnson. On another team, that might be someone else. This, again, has to do with stat hunting. Do you need blocks and field goal percentage and rebounds? If he's the starting center, he's probably going to get anywhere from 7 to 11. Do you need those categories? Jakob Poeltl is that guy. We talked earlier in the show about Kenneth Faried being more the field goal percent, rebound, and a smattering of both defensive stats guy. And we talked about Enes Kanter being both percentages, but no defensive stats. So, and some points and rebounds. Pirtle's not going to get you points. He's going to get you rebounds, field goal percent, steals, and blocks. He's going to be very good on the defensive side. So build your team down the stretch based on the statistical categories that can help you grow the most, particularly in your roto stuff. But obviously in head-to-head as well, you're looking to shore up categories and make sure that you can win more than half of them as you advance through the playoffs. Is your team truly awful at field goal percent? And maybe a guy like Jakob Poeltl wouldn't even make a dent? Yeah, all right, fine. Throw him away. Is your team really bad at free throw percent already and are maybe average in field goal percent, steals, and blocks? Then he's a much better fit. Are you in a roto league where you feel like you could actually charge a little bit and pass a few teams in blocks? Maybe teams that are down near the bottom of the league that might not pay attention down the stretch? That could be pretty useful. Look at how these players fit with your team. It's not all about, Pirtle's probably going to be if he starts, he's probably a top 110 guy. Kenneth Reed is probably a top 110 guy if he's playing 25 minutes. Cantor's probably a top 100 guy. Joakim Noah's probably a top 110 guy. I think Dwight Powell goes top 90. To me, he's the one that separates himself a little bit from that big cluster mess of center pickups. But of all these other ones, you're picking up based on how you think they fit your team. Oh, Robin Lopez should be owned as well. He and, to me, Dwight Powell are a little bit ahead of these other guys. But it's all fitting in how the categories work for you. The Warriors beat the 76ers, and nothing surprised anybody. Klay Thompson sat this game out, and Damian Lee had 12 points. A tree fell in the forest, but nobody was there to hear it. Jonah Bolden played 22 minutes for the 76ers. He looks like a pretty decent fill-in as long as both Embiid and Marjanovic are out. And it seems like they will be at least for a couple more ball games, so I would totally get behind streaming Jonah Bolden. Of course, this is where you look to see who they might be playing next time around. They've got Orlando tomorrow. Good luck with Nick Vucevic. But you know what? He flies around a little bit. No reason to think that Bolden couldn't maybe sneak a couple of blocks. He's not going to rebound all that much. He's a leaper. So go a leapin', should you choose. You probably got, what do you think, 2 more games of it? Fair enough. Nothing else on this team caught my eye. New Orleans beat Denver in Denver. How about that? No Anthony Davis, so the rest of them decided to play really freaking hard. Drew Holiday's been amazing. He's so good. Cheick Diallo looks great, and he is for sure a pickup. Throw him into the mix. Points, rebounds, field goal percent, steals. A nice combination there from his center. A little bit on the blocks. I think maybe more steals than blocks for him. He doesn't miss many shots. And they just play this wide-open, silly offense that's going to be so fun for him. So Cheick Diallo is another of those centers you can put on the list. Anthony Davis is questionable with illness for their next ball game, whatever that may mean. This may be the beginning of the end for him as well, so you might see some healthy DNPs creep in, and if that's the case, then Diallo really gets a bump. The Nuggets look to be basically a 4-horse race right now. Jokic, Millsap, Murray, and Will Barton, who dialed it back a little bit in this ballgame, but he's been better of late, and he's playing big minutes. Gary Harris saw 26 minutes in this game to Malik Beasley's 22. I have trouble seeing that position battle go any farther than like a 28-20 Gary Harris advantage, because Malik Beasley's been so good this year. But maybe he will. And so while I think that Gary Harris is probably a drop, if you're in your playoffs right now, he's definitely a drop because there are better guys out playing more minutes. If your stuff doesn't start for another couple of weeks or you can afford to sit him for another week or two, I think I would. There was a news note that popped out talking about his minutes cap being lifted. The question is, how far do they actually raise his total minutes? Isaiah Thomas is way over-owned. Please drop him if you have him on your team outside of like a weird keeper format where you're hoping he gets signed as a starter's role on some team next year. He's atrocious coming back from injury right now. I'm sure he'll be fine game-wise, but he has no fantasy game this season. Milwaukee got a huge one from Brook Lopez. This is a tough spot. Back-to-back in altitude, flying in from the West Coast, and they almost won it anyway. They blew a late lead, not surprisingly, running out of gas, without Eric Bledsoe, without Malcolm Brogdon. I'm surprised they didn't just sit everybody and say, screw it, schedule loss. Apparently that's what it takes to get Chris Middleton going. Everybody's got to be out. Niko Mirotic seemed to be feeling the effects of the altitude. Derek Favors had a huge one for Utah. Joe Ingles, by the way, has quietly been playing a lot better over the last month after about 3 kind of mediocre months to start the year. And finally, the one that really might put the dagger in, the Lakers lose to the Suns in Phoenix. Yuck. Brutal defeat. JaVale McGee was great. He went 10 for 10 in this ball game. And they finally let him play 26 minutes. LeBron was fine, but didn't play any defense and looked to be at times a bit half-hearted. Brandon Ingram's been playing really well for a couple of weeks, but his fantasy numbers don't really follow because of a lack of defensive stats. Kyle Kuzma has been good, but faded. Rajon Rondo has been putting up big numbers as a starter. He's a terrible player at this stage of his career, but if he's starting, and I know this wasn't a good ballgame for him, if he's starting, he should be used in fantasy. Sad as I am to say it, it's the honest-to-goodness truth. He was putting up gigantic lines as a starter, and this was the dud. My thoughts on the Lakers, and I said it on a podcast last week, is that I think they're actually quietly tanking. I think LeBron has told Clutch Sports to spread the word secretly to free agents that the Lakers are actually making a push for a better draft pick. What better way to do it than to lose to the dregs of the NBA? Not only do you lose a game in the standings, but you actually move closer to the terrible teams. And they're not going to catch the Suns. The Lakers are 17 wins ahead of them. But the Lakers, they're 2 ugly losses away from falling behind the Timberwolves and Pelicans and Hornets and possibly the Heat. I mean, there's a big jump here. If the Lakers miss the playoffs, they might as well miss it by 5 or 6 games. It does start to make me a little nervous that we might not see LeBron the last week of the regular season, but we're not there yet, and hopefully your fantasy leagues are over by then. Although, also, the Lakers really could use Lonzo Ball back. Their lack of defense is astounding. Mikal Bridges looked good. He's a guy we've been keeping an eye on. Tyler Johnson did not. That's a couple of games in a row where he's been extremely quiet. A lack of usage, certainly on the shoulders of guys like Devin Booker, Josh Jackson, DeAndre Ayton, mostly the first 2 guys that I listed. I like Tyler Johnson. I think he's a nice source of threes, steals, and blocks from the point guard position. But if you don't need what he does, move on. Again, all these fringe guys, whether it's top 90, 100, 110, 120, all these fringe guys are movable pieces at this time of year. I'm dropping players on my team that are better than that. Top 80 guys I'm dropping just because I have no need for their stat set. And that's more a roto problem than a head-to-head problem. You're probably not dropping a top 80 guy in head-to-head, but in roto, like for instance, I actually dropped Hassan Whiteside in a league. Not because he was injured, but because I don't really need his rebounds. I don't see that changing my outcome very much, and his free throw shooting was costing me points. And frankly, his shot blocking hadn't been that great since the first month of the year. Yeah, he's been okay lately. Shot the ball better. Disappears as soon as I put him back in my lineup. This is crazy stuff. That seems insane on paper, but if you guys saw all the numbers that I saw, you'd know why I did it. These are decisions you have to make right now. I don't care if somebody else picks the guy up. That's not my freaking problem, in Roto in particular. I'm dealing with my own situation. We'll quickly glance back at Friday, make sure we didn't miss anybody that played over the weekend. Obviously, that Chicago-Atlanta 4 overtime game was a pretty cool one, just because. And I don't think anybody played on Friday that we didn't see over the weekend. Maybe the Sacramento Kings. They might have been off over the weekend. They're only interesting right now because Marvin Bagley is out for a couple of weeks. It's been a nice boost for Willie Cauley-Stein. I thought we might see more from Harrison Barnes, but he just sort of doesn't look that good. And then otherwise, it's kind of the same old guys. Harry Giles played 17 minutes. He was really productive in them and a crazy high usage, but 17 minutes just isn't enough. There are very few guys out there that can get it done in 17 minutes, and almost none of them are that young. Most of them have some sort of portfolio you're working with where you can say, oh, okay, like this is a workable number. But for a guy that hasn't proven anything to us, to expect him to do it in limited minutes, I'm off that train. 7-game Monday card as we turn our attention to this evening. Dallas is in Brooklyn. We'll obviously be keeping an eye on Dwight Powell as long as he's in the starting lineup, though. I'm trotting him out there. And Brooklyn, ooh, they are fun for opposing big men. This could be a nice one. Atlanta is in Miami. The status of Hassan Whiteside is obviously a big question mark related to Bam Adebayo. Kelly Olynyk's been cruising. Can Goran Dragic get out there and play? All these questions surrounding the Heat, who suddenly actually have a few interesting fantasy assets. The Atlanta Hawks, I still would like to know what's going on with Kent Bazemore's minutes, if indeed the Wings are healthy for tonight's ball game. With Spellman out longer term, does John Collins play? Does that mean we could actually get a one more game situation out of Alex Len? I wouldn't feel that comfortable with it. Denver, we're keeping an eye on basically the Gary Harris, Malik Beasley situation. That's the one I think that's left. It's not completely an answered question. San Antonio, what's the Jakob Poeltl deal? New Orleans, do we see Anthony Davis in this ball game? If not, how much Jack Diallo is there? Can Jahlil Okafor sustain fantasy value in about 23 or 24 minutes per game? I don't really much trust any of the wings in New Orleans outside of the main cogs. Milwaukee is in Phoenix. Bucks, I would assume, are going to have most of their guys back for this ball game. I believe they took that one in Utah as basically a schedule loss and figured, if we steal it, outstanding. Phoenix, not a ton of questions left for this team. There's the Tyler Johnson stuff, if indeed there is anything there. Mikal Bridges, to me, is still a must-own guy. I don't care if he's on the bench or as a starter. He's been just terrific. The Knicks, Mitchell Robinson. He's obviously the big story. We talked a little bit earlier in this podcast about all of the points league-style guys they have on that team. I don't think that that's changing anytime soon. Sacramento Kings, we'll keep an eye on Barnes and Willie Cauley-Stein to see how their fantasy value fluctuates without Marvin Bagley. And the Clippers are in L.A. This is sort of, one might venture to say, the last chance for the Lakers. They're 4.5 games back of the last playoff spot, 5 games back of the Clippers. The way to get back in it, you got to string a few victories together. They haven't done that. I think they'd like to win this game just to make a little bit of a statement. I also think they'd like to lose this game because it's another way to improve their pick. We shall see, I guess. I don't know. Am I really serious about the secret tanking? Not really, but it certainly would be a smart move. They're not going to win the championship this year. And everybody's talking about how LeBron needs to prove he can carry a team to the playoffs again. He just did it last year in Cleveland. He missed a quarter of this season with a groin injury. I don't think he has much to prove to the guys that he'd be recruiting to this team. And then the Clippers, the usual 4 guys. That's sort of where we sit with that stuff. And that's about where that's at. I really think that the key right now is to focus on categories. You've got to be looking for the guys that fit your team the best. You did all the hard work to get all the best players available all season long, to build up your leads in different categories, or find yourself behind in others. In Roto, I cannot stress enough, look to see where you can gain the most ground the quickest. Where are the categories where you can jump a few spots with a small adjustment? Nothing is tiny. Everything requires a little bit of work. And then head-to-head, start to game plan on streaming a little bit. Pick the guy or guys. I would say a good sort of point to work from, and it doesn't have to be necessarily this exactly, is half the number of your weekly games limit are the number of spots you should be streaming. So if you have a weekly games limit of 4, you should be streaming 2 spots, 6, 3 spots, so on and so forth. If you have a weekly moves limit of 3, which I do, and any odd number, I think you probably round down. It's really hard to stream 2 slots with only 3 moves. So I think in that spot, you're basically streaming 1, and you probably want to save 1 move for Saturday/Sunday in case a key player on your team gets injured, so you're not taking a 0. But basically, you really can't be passive once you make the playoffs in your head-to-head league. You have to almost game plan the whole week before it even begins, and then you make adjustments as things go. The way you get nailed is if you use all of your moves by, Wednesday. One of your guys goes down on Wednesday, and then you just have to wear 2 or 3 zeros. That's crushing. I think you should game plan to use all of your moves by Saturday, but just make sure that if one of those moves was set to be one guy and a different dude gets hurt, you drop the guy who got hurt. And I don't care how good they are. If they're going to be out for more than one game, you drop them. You cannot take 2 games off in the playoffs on your fantasy team. Be ruthless. And in Roto, on top of hunting the categories that can get you the biggest jumps, make sure you use all of your games cap. Actually hit it. Really, really get close. And I would say, and we're not there yet, we'll bring this up again as we get towards the end of the regular season, don't leave all 10 games for the last day, because you're going to get these late scratches, and only of your 13 players or 14 players on your roster, probably only 8 of them are actually going to play. So probably only leave about 8 games for the last day of the regular season. Again, getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. The only thing I'm asking you to do these days in the podcast is to please rate and review it. Thank you to the handful of you that have done it since I started begging last week. So I'll continue to beg this week. Please rate and review the podcast if you have a moment. Fantasy NBA Today is the name of the show. You can find it basically anywhere podcasts are located. If you're using whatever service, I mean, honestly, the one that helps the most is iTunes, because they're the sort of the big whopper. They're the whale of this whole operation. But ratings and reviews help everywhere. Whatever it is you're using. If you've already done it and you're thinking, man, I wish more people would have done it, just grab somebody's phone and do it on that one. Seriously, whatever it takes. We got to keep climbing the charts, and with your help, we can keep doing it. Thank you again to Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company for their continued partnership here at Hoopball. This is Fantasy NBA Today, a Hoopball presentation. Back tomorrow with a half-length podcast on Tuesday. Mike Apatria will be with us on Wednesday. We'll talk DFS. Thursday's a halfer. Friday with Brew. You guys know how the weeks go here as we roll down the stretch. This is all fantasy all the time. No fuss, no muss. What's the no cuts, no butts, no coconuts? That should be the last thing I say on a podcast someday. It'll be near the last thing I say on this podcast. I am Dan Besbris at Dan Besbris on Twitter. Hoopball is at Hoopball Fantasy on the Twitterverse. And we hope to talk to you over there. If you have any questions, obviously feel free to take it to Twitter. I know that I don't cover as many wide-ranging things lately as we really hone in on the fantasy stuff. So if you have questions, hit me up. I'm at my computer almost all day, every day. It's a sickness, but it's me. Have a wonderful Monday, everybody. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoopball presentation.